3 years after my daughter cut off contact, I received a letter bearing her name. My heart sank as I read each word a cry for help, urgent, pleading for money to save her life. But when I looked closely, I realized the handwriting was not hers. Someone had impersonated my daughter, aimed straight at a father's deepest pain, and from that moment, I knew. The truth I was about to discover would not only change my family, but also uncover lies I had never even considered. After 3 years of silence, I pulled open the rusty hinge of the mailbox. It creaked loudly, a lonely sound against the quiet of the late afternoon. My hand trembled as the door gave way, and there it was on top of a small pile of junk mail, a single white envelope. It didn't look ordinary. It glowed faintly under the slanting sun, as if it were a foreign object that didn't belong to the world of bills and advertisements. My pulse quickened before I even had time to read the handwriting. 3 years of emptiness had trained me not to expect anything, not to hope. Yet the moment I saw the familiar script, my heart lurched. The careful lettering spelled out my name, Henry, and just beneath it, in bold strokes I could never mistake, the return address, Elena's apartment in Lincoln Park, the very place where everything had unraveled. The date stamped in the corner made my chest tighten. August 31st, her birthday. How could I ever forget? My hands shook as I held the envelope up to the fading light. The paper was thin enough that the ink showed through faintly, each dark and light stroke revealing itself like a memory resurfacing. I traced the curves with my finger, terrified that if I blinked, it might disappear. It was real. After 3 years of silence, my daughter had written to me on her 38th birthday. "Clara!" I shouted, almost tripping as I rushed up the porch steps. My shoes struck the wooden floor with a hollow thud, and the screen door slammed shut behind me with a sharp bang that echoed through the house. "Clara, come quickly!" My voice cracked with a mix of excitement and disbelief I hadn't felt in years. From the kitchen, Clara appeared, drying her damp hands with a dish towel slung over her shoulder. A faint scent of soap and the warmth of the oven still clung to her. She stopped in the doorway, her gray eyes instantly locking on the envelope. I clutched like it might vanish. At first, her brows knitted in irritation at the noise, but the moment she saw what I was holding, her expression shifted to astonishment. "What on earth?" she began, but I cut her off, holding the envelope higher. "Look, it's Elena. It's her handwriting. Today, of all days." Clara came closer, adjusting her glasses with trembling fingers. She leaned in, studying the neat strokes the way a teacher studies a student's work. "Yes, it does look like hers," she admitted slowly, her voice thick. She touched my arm gently, grounding me. "But Henry, are you sure you're ready for this?" I turned the envelope over and over in my hands. It wasn't heavy, not stuffed with pages, but it was enough weighty with possibility. "After all this time," I whispered, "maybe this is it. Maybe she's finally ready to talk." The living room seemed to hold its breath with me. Golden light spilled through the front window, casting the room in a honey-colored haze. Dust motes swirled lazily in the air, suspended like tiny stars. The steady tick of the wall clock beat out each second, stretching them into eternity. Outside, neighbors came home from work, children's laughter carried from the yards, life rolling on as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But inside, the world had stopped. Clara sat down beside me, her presence solid and warm. "Whatever it says," she murmured, "we'll face it together." I gripped the envelope tighter, aware that this small piece of paper could either reopen old wounds or stitch together what had been torn apart. I nodded, though it felt as if a stone had lodged itself in my throat. 3 years of restless nights spent asking myself whether I had been too harsh, too stubborn, or simply too much like my own father had once been. 3 years of hoping, of reaching out into silence. 3 years of missing the sound of my daughter's laughter, the quick wit in her voice, the way she used to call every Sunday just to chat about nothing and everything. Now, this envelope lay before me, heavy not with paper, but with possibilities, reconciliation, forgiveness. perhaps even an invitation to step back into her life. Or maybe it was nothing more than another refusal, another door slammed shut in my face. I placed it carefully on the coffee table between Clara and me, as if it were some fragile antique that might shatter at the slightest touch. My eyes refused to leave it, while my trembling hands pressed against my knees, trying to still themselves. The silence in the room pressed against us, thick and unforgiving. It was so complete that I could hear the kitchen clock ticking its way forward, each click like a drop of water falling in an empty cavern. Outside, faint rustling leaves whispered against the glass panes, as if the world itself were holding its breath with us. Each second stretched longer than the last, mocking my anticipation. At last, I whispered, almost to myself. She remembered. She knew I'd be thinking of her today. Clara's hand slid over mine, warm and steady, like an anchor holding me against the storm surging inside. Her gray eyes carried that quiet certainty, the same strength I had leaned on for more than 40 years. And then the memory struck with sudden, piercing clarity. Elena, as a little girl, no more than 8 years old, bounding down these very stairs in her pink pajamas, her small feet thudding against the wooden steps like a drumbeat of joy. Her wide eyes lit up when she spotted the lopsided birthday cake on the table, candles flickering unevenly. Her laughter, bright and unguarded, once filled every corner of this house, driving out the shadows. I picked up the envelope again, holding it close to the window where the late afternoon light poured in golden streams. The writing was deliberate, measured, not a single spelling mistake, not a single letter scratched out. Every curve and line carried a precision that suggested care, as though each stroke had been breathed into existence with caution. August 31st, 2022. Clara murmured so softly I had to tilt my head to catch the words. Her voice trembled with the memory. The day you drove to her place, thinking you could bring her back, and instead, she shut the door. For God, Tobias. The weight of that afternoon pressed down on me again like a leaden blanket, the harsh finality of that slammed door, the sound still echoing in my ears even after all these years. Now, here I was once more. My fingers slipped under the flap of the envelope, sweat beating at the tips. I drew in a long, ragged breath, my heartbeat pounding like a distant drum. Perhaps this was the moment of truth, the moment that could either bring Elena back into my life or push her away forever. I sank heavily into the kitchen chair, the unopened envelope still in my hand. Its familiar weight tugged at something deep in my memory, pulling me back to that September afternoon 3 years ago, the moment when everything began to fracture. I remembered standing outside Elena's apartment building, my finger hovering above the doorbell. The Lincoln Park street was alive with noise, car horns blaring, high heels striking the pavement in quick staccato rhythms, the occasional bark of a restless dog. The smell of freshly roasted coffee drifted from the corner cafe, mingling with the damp scent of leaves left by the morning rain. It was a symphony of urban life, vibrant and relentless, a stark contrast to the tension tightening around my chest. I had driven there with fierce determination, convinced that if I could just speak to her plainly, I could make her see the truth about Victor. The building itself seemed to tower over me like a silent judge. And then the door opened. When the door creaked aside, I saw Elena's face so achingly familiar, yet worn. The dark circles under her eyes looked like smudges of ink, her hair pinned up hastily with stray strands falling loose across her forehead. My once meticulous daughter looked as though she was holding herself together by sheer force of will. "Dad? What are you doing here?" Her voice carried both surprise and fatigue. "We need to talk, sweetheart. About your marriage." Her jaw clenched instantly. If this is about Victor again, then yes, it is about him. About the so-called biggest mistake of my life, according to you. She stepped back but did not invite me in. "Elena, I don't need to tell you how to live your life. But when your husband is gambling away your future, you need advice from someone who truly cares about you." That was when Victor appeared behind her, his hand settling on her shoulder like a brand of ownership. His eyes flicked over me, a polite smile plastered on his lips but never touching his gaze. For the briefest moment, I could swear that his eyes flashed with something icy, sharp as steel, before the mask of charm slid back into place. "Henry," he said smoothly, his voice warm in a way that felt practiced, "what brings you here?" I reached into my pocket and pulled out the receipts, my hand trembling not just from anger but from the fear that Elena might turn away from me once more. The black numbers glared up at us like open wounds, $1,200 blown in a single night, each figure slashed at the fragile hope I carried. "Elena, I found these in his car," I said firmly. Her face drained of color. "You went through our car?" she snapped, but her tone trembled more with fear than fury. Her eyes flicked to Victor, then darted away from mine, as though afraid that if she held my gaze for even a heartbeat longer, the truth would betray itself. Victor's mask slipped for just a fraction of a second, long enough to reveal the cold shadow lurking beneath. "That was a business event," he said quickly, too quickly. "Entertaining clients, that's all." "Don't lie to me, son," I barked, my voice rising. "I know the difference between a business expense and an addiction." "This is my life!" Elena exploded, her voice cracking like an over-tightened string on a violin. "My marriage, my choices. When will you stop treating me like a child?" "When you stop acting like one," I shot back, desperation bleeding into every word. "This man is destroying your reputation. He's draining your savings. Can't you see it?" Her shoulders hunched defensively, and Victor's grip on her tightened, his knuckles white with pressure. He didn't need words, his touch said it all. "Remember who you belong to." My voice broke as I pleaded. "And what about family, Elena? Do the dinners, the nights we sat by your bed when you were sick, do none of those moments matter anymore?" She laughed then, a brittle, joyless laugh that carried no warmth. "Family? You mean the family that never accepted my choices? The family that questioned everything I did? No, Dad. This isn't about love. This is about control. And I won't let you dictate my life." Victor stepped forward, his voice honeyed but false. "Maybe it's time for some space, Henry. Let Elena make her own decisions without interference." His manipulation was flawless, practiced. I watched Elena absorb his words, saw the wall rising between us brick by brick. "He's right, Dad. I think you should go." Her words landed like hammer blows, each syllable tearing through me. "Elena, please, think about what you're saying." "I am thinking," she said, voice trembling but resolute. "And I choose my husband over your suspicion." The door slammed shut. The small click of the latch might as well have been thunder in my ears. I stood there frozen, my hand still half raised as if to knock again, but the space between us had become an impenetrable wall of concrete. I stood frozen before the closed door, my ear straining for the faintest sound from the hallway inside, any sign, any shuffle of footsteps, the click of a latch turning. For a long moment I waited, praying the knob would twist again, that the door might open a second time. But all that came was silence, and that silence weighed heavier than any spoken rejection could. The drive home was the longest of my life. The wipers swept rhythmically across the windshield, but my eyes blurred not from the drizzle outside, but from the tears I refused to let fall. The glow of the street lamps stretched into smeared ribbons across the glass, each one pulling me deeper into chains of helplessness and defeat. That night became the seed of an obsession. 3 years of desperate efforts to close the widening gulf between us, each attempt only stretching the distance further. The very next morning I dialed her number, and the morning after that. Every time my chest pounded so hard I could hear it echo inside me. And then came the cruel familiarity. "Hello, this is Elena." Her recorded voice played like a mocking ghost, repeating the words I longed to hear in person. Still, I left messages, rambling apologies, offers of coffee, pleas for a conversation. She never once called back. By October, it was no longer her voice that answered. The first time Victor picked up instead, my heart sank into a pit. His tone was polite but edged with menace. "She doesn't want to talk to you, Henry." "Then let me hear her say that. You heard it already when you showed up uninvited and made her upset. Leave us alone." The line went dead, leaving me with nothing but the white-knuckled grip on the receiver. November was worse. I went to her apartment twice. The first time, Victor intercepted me in the lobby. He stood there in a suit pressed sharp as a blade, tie knotted perfectly, while I wore a dust-stained work jacket from the job site. The difference between us gaped like a canyon, and he wielded it like a weapon. "This has to stop," he said smoothly, blocking the elevator. "You're stressing her out." "I'm stressing her out? What about what you're doing to her bank account?" His smile never wavered, but his eyes hardened to ice. "Careful, old man. Harassment is a serious charge." The second time, he was waiting before I even reached the building. "I warned you," he said, pulling out his phone. "One more visit and I'm calling the police. Elena doesn't want to see you." His words carved into me sharper than the November wind. Christmas was unbearable. For years, I had been the one who chose her gifts, combing stores until I found something that would light up her eyes. That year, I picked a leather journal, the kind she had always loved in college, embossed with her initials in gold. Weeks later, the package came back untouched, a harsh red stamp shouting, "Return to sender." I sat staring at that box for hours, the bright holiday wrapping now nothing but a cruel seal of finality. Birthday cards, Mother's Day flowers, all of it returned the same way. Each gesture bounced back like a stone thrown against a brick wall. The last attempt came in the spring of last year, after Linda mentioned Elena's IT company had moved to a new downtown office. I called in sick to work, dressed in my best jacket, and waited in the lobby like a man begging for crumbs. When she appeared with her colleagues, striding briskly toward the revolving doors in her sharp business suit, she looked every bit the professional woman she had become: successful, independent, untouchable. For a moment, I felt as though I was watching a stranger, a planet orbiting far beyond my reach. But then, her eyes flicked toward me, just for an instant, and something glimmered there, a flicker of recognition, of the little girl who once called me Daddy. "Elena," I whispered, my heart nearly stopping. She froze, her face betraying a brief, desperate longing before it collapsed into a mask of restraint. "Dad, you can't be here. Just 5 minutes, please. We used to talk about everything. Just 5 minutes." Her colleagues slowed, sensing the tension. She stepped closer, her voice barely more than a whisper. "Victor will lose his mind if he finds out you came." "Then don't tell him. This is between us." Her voice cracked. "There's no just us anymore." The words splintered like breaking glass. I wanted to reach for her, but my arm refused to move, paralyzed by the chasm she had just carved between us. "I can change your mind, Elena. Please." She shook her head, tears welling but refusing to fall. "It's too late." And then she turned away, walking back to her world of glass towers and colleagues who pretended not to stare. I was left standing in the lobby, one more stranger in a crowd, the ghost of a father she had chosen to leave behind. That night I told Clara I had done everything I could. Some bridges, once burned, can never be rebuilt. Yet here I was, hours later, sitting with an unexpected letter in my hands and feeling that old ember of hope glow back to life. Maybe I had been wrong. Maybe some bridges just needed a different kind of light. I rose and went to find Clara, the envelope pressed against me. Whatever was inside, we would face it together. I hugged the envelope to my chest as if I were carrying a second heart pounding, fragile, too easy to break. My footsteps thudded along the old floorboards, each small creak echoing the tremor building inside me. Clara sat in her old armchair by the window, a crossword book spread open on her lap. Late sunlight pooled across the room and caught the silver threads in her hair, making them glint like fine wire. Her pencil tapped an absent rhythm on the page tap until she saw my face. "Clara," I said, and my voice came out softer than I intended, almost reverent. She looked up, the pencil suspended midair. "Henry, you look like you've seen a ghost." "Better than a ghost," I breathed, lifting the envelope. My hands shook. "It's Elena. Today of all days." The crossword slid from her knees and thumped onto the rug. She stood quickly. "Are you certain? Look at the handwriting, those careful loops, the way she crosses her T's." I stepped closer, holding the envelope for her to see. She remembered it's her birthday. She's thinking of us. Clara adjusted her reading glasses and leaned in, the faint warmth of the kitchen still clinging to her sweater. She studied the address the way she once studied her students' essays, patient, precise, unblinking. "It does look like hers," she said slowly, the words heavy after so much silence. Maybe she finally understands that family is what matters most. The hope in my own voice startled me. Maybe Victor's hold isn't as strong as we thought. Clara reached for my hand and squeezed. "Oh, Henry, I miss her," her laugh. "The way she used to call with every little triumph at work. Remember how proud she was when they made her a manager? Before he turned her against us." Old anger stirred, a dark current rising, but I pressed it down. Today was for hope, not bitterness. Still, this letter changed everything. She had reached out first. We stood shoulder to shoulder, staring at the small rectangle, as if it were a fragile bridge spanning years of distance. The living room felt strange. Transformed, the pale yellow light pasted itself across the walls like a curtain waiting for the storm to break. The air thickened until I could hear the faint scrape of maple leaves brushing the window glass. "What do you think she says?" Clara whispered. "Maybe she's pregnant," I said, allowing the thought to warm me. "Maybe she wants to tell us about a grandchild. Or maybe," I thought, "she left him realized we had been right about the gambling. Or perhaps it was nothing so complicated. Perhaps she simply missed her dad." Clara's eyes brimmed. "She is 38 today, and part of her is still the little girl who used to climb into our bed during thunderstorms." I nodded, swept back to birthday mornings, glazed with maple syrup and bright with torn wrapping paper, back to when making Elena happy was the easiest task in the world. Before life grew tangled, before we lost one another in a maze of pride and misunderstanding. "Whatever it says," Clara murmured, settling beside me on the sofa, "we'll face it together." I set my fingertip beneath the flap, ready to tear it open and learn what our daughter wanted to tell us. After 3 long years, this paper felt solemn, significant, real. "Nothing left to lose," I muttered, lifting the edge. "Wait!" Clara's voice cracked through the room like a snapped violin string. I froze. My breath snagged in my throat. The envelope turned suddenly heavier, less a promise than a blade hanging by a thread. "Wait for what?" I managed. "Look again," she said, leaning close, squinting through her readers. "At the handwriting." My pulse stumbled. "Clara, what's wrong?" She took the envelope gently from my hands and lifted it to the window. The light made the ink bleed faintly through the paper, each stroke a pale shadow. I watched her face go still, the way an examiner goes still when they find the error that changes the grade. "Look at how she wrote your name," Clara said softly. "See the slant?" "It looks fine to me," I said, irritation pricking at the hope I had so carefully rebuilt. "No, Henry, Elena's handwriting always tilts to the right. Always." Her teacher's certainty slipped into her tone. 30 years of marking papers taught me how to see these things. She traced the letters with a fingertip. "This slant's left." "Maybe she's stressed," I offered weakly. "People's handwriting changes when they're upset." "Not the fundamental slant," Clara said. "That's muscle memory." She held the envelope at arm's length, then brought it close again. "And the pressure," Elena writes with a heavy hand. She presses hard. "These strokes are far too light." A different fear tightened in my chest. "You're imagining things," I said, though the words felt thin even as I spoke them. "Am I?" Clara's voice was gentle but unwavering. "Look at this A in Henry. Elena makes her A's perfectly round little coins. This one is a spear tip, and her F's, she never loops them like this. Too fancy, too ornamental." She pointed, line by line, circle by circle, as if unthreading a forgery stitch by stitch. Whoever wrote this tried to mimic her style but missed the habits that live in the hand. I wanted to argue to guard the tiny flame of hope cupped in my palms, but doubt seeped in like cold water. The more I looked, the more the differences revealed themselves. The leftward lean, the timid pressure, the elaborate loops that Elena would never make. The envelope that had felt like a bridge now felt like a test, one we might already be failing. The clock in the kitchen ticked on steady, impartial, counting down to whatever truth waited on the other side of that seal. I stared at the flap, my finger still resting beneath it, and for the first time since the envelope arrived, I was afraid of what opening it might prove. The envelope suddenly felt like it had turned to lead in my hands, cold, heavy, merciless. I lowered it onto the coffee table, and the dull thud it made sounded like the burial of my hope. Someone hadn't simply mimicked Elena's handwriting. They had built a trap, carefully stitched from the fabric of our memories. The cruelty of it pressed against my chest like an invisible hand, choking me with its precision. To weaponize a father's longing that was savagery of a different order. Clara shifted uneasily beside me, searching for words that might soften the blow. "Maybe I'm wrong," she whispered, though her voice lacked conviction. "Maybe she just writes differently now." The words fell flat, hollow. She saw the devastation on my face, and her own eyes clouded with dread. Outside, children's laughter drifted through the open window, high-pitched and free. Once, those sounds had reminded me of Elena skipping down our driveway after school. But now the echoes jabbed like needles, reminding me only of what had been stolen. Finally, I broke the silence. "We have to open it," I said, my voice raspy, stripped raw. My fingers slid under the flap. Sweat gathered at my temples. Hope had died. Only steel-hard resolve remained. The paper crackled with a harsh swoosh as I unfolded it, the sound sharp as a tear ripping through memory. My hands moved mechanically, but my heart hammered violently against my ribs. "Dearest Dad," I read slowly, the words slamming against my ears like hammer blows. A phrase once tender now twisted into mockery. Clara gasped, one hand flying to her chest. The color drained from her face. A pencil slipped from her fingers, clattering to the floor unnoticed. "I desperately need your help. I'm in the hospital. They're saying I need emergency surgery that my insurance won't cover. The doctors say I need $15,000 immediately, or I may not make it." I stopped, staring at the string of random numbers and letters that followed an electronic wallet address. It looked alien, absurd. I read it aloud, but the syllables were meaningless, like the coded mutterings of a stranger. "Time is running out," the letter insisted. "The surgery is scheduled for tomorrow morning, and they won't proceed without payment. I'm sorry for waiting until a crisis to reach out, but I'm desperate. Please help me, Dad. With love, your daughter Elena." The words hung in the air like poison. Each sentence urged urgency, but every curve of ink dripped suspicion. The plea was not my daughter's voice. It was the voice of a predator who knew how to dress lies in the clothes of love. Clara leaned heavily into me, trembling. I folded the letter slowly, feeling as though I were folding a knife. Whoever had written this had not only forged her hand, they had dared to forge her soul. The letter slipped from my hand, twirling slowly in the air before landing on the coffee table with a dry flutter, like the broken wing of a bird crashing mid-flight. Clara's reaction was instantaneous. She pressed her hands against her temples, eyes wide, her voice sharp as a blade. "That's not how she writes, Henry. Elena has never called you father in a letter. It was always Dad, or sometimes just your name. This is wrong." I clenched my fists so tight that my nails dug crescents into my palms. Someone had taken the rawest wound of our lives and turned it into a cheap con. This wasn't just forgery, it was an assault, aimed directly at our hearts. Outside, the laughter of neighborhood children rang through the dusk air, once a comfort, now an echo of mockery. Every giggle stabbed deeper, pulling me back to Elena's own childhood, when her laughter had filled our home. Now, that same memory fanned the fire of my rage. $15,000. The number seared my mind. Did they really believe we would fall into their trap? Minutes earlier, I had been ready to tear open that envelope with joy, desperate to believe in reconciliation. Clara was right if she hadn't noticed the slant of the handwriting. I would already be on the phone arranging a transfer. They had almost fooled me completely. The thought made me spring from my chair, the legs scraping against the floor with a sharp screech. I couldn't sit still any longer. "I have to call Elena," I said hoarsely. "I need to know she's safe. I need to make sure this doesn't tie into something worse." My voice cracked between command and plea. Clara gave a grave nod. "And we need to find out who's behind this." The old black phone sat silent on the kitchen counter, its plastic dulled from years of use, the receiver worn smooth by countless conversations with family. I seized it like the hand of an old friend, my fingers dialing Elena's number from muscle memory, etched there after 3 years of silence. The ringtone droned in my ear, brrr, 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 a hollow knocking on the door of an empty room. On the third ring, her voice filled the line, polished, professional, distant, the voicemail, not the warm voice that used to call me every Sunday. "Elena, it's Dad." My throat tightened. "Please, call me back as soon as you can. This is important." The words spilled out, but when I hung up, the silence that followed revealed the tremor in my own voice. I paced across the linoleum floor, each footfall a rapid drumbeat of frustration. I called again, and again. Each time the voicemail answered, hope sparked and then extinguished like a match in the rain. By the third attempt, my composure broke. "Elena," I said, my voice cracking, "someone is using your name to scam us. They sent a fake letter asking for money, pretending to be you. I need to know you're safe. Please call me back immediately." The line clicked off into silence. I slammed the receiver down harder than I intended, the crash reverberating through the quiet kitchen. My chest heaved, caught between the fury boiling in my veins and the gnawing fear that squeezed my heart. The slam of the receiver echoed through the kitchen, sharp and final, like a hammer striking the coffin of hope. The silence that followed was deafening, filled only with the pounding of my own heartbeat. Clara moved closer, her hand resting gently on my shoulder. Her fingers trembled, her eyes filled with worry, as though she longed to anchor me in place. But she knew nothing could hold me back now. On the counter, the false letter still lay in plain sight. The lifeless words seemed to stare back at me, mocking the naivety of a father who had once believed too quickly. Every line on that page had been sharpened into a cruel weapon, designed to wound. I snatched the car keys from the hook by the back door. The metallic jingle rang out in the stillness, harsh and jarring, like a bell announcing a duel that could no longer be avoided. Clara's voice trailed after me. "Henry, your heart remember what the doctor said." I paused with one hand on the doorknob. "My heart broke 3 years ago, Clara," I whispered without turning back. "A little confrontation won't make it worse." The engine roared to life, shattering the quiet suburb. As I reversed down the driveway, Clara's face appeared in the front window, pale and stricken, her eyes following me like a silent warning. The weight of her gaze pressed against me as the house disappeared in the rearview mirror. On Lakeshore Drive, Lake Michigan shimmered with streaks of silver under a sky thickening with storm clouds. I tapped my fingers against the steering wheel, each beat like a countdown to the inevitable encounter. This was no random scam. Someone had timed everything too perfectly, the forged handwriting, the exact date of Elena's birthday, the cruel knowledge of our estrangement. This was a knife aimed with precision at a wound that had never healed. A delivery truck braked hard in front of me, forcing me to slam on my own brakes. The squeal of rubber echoed as the acrid stench of burnt tires filled the cabin. Ahead, traffic clogged into an immovable line of brake lights, while the steel-blue expanse of the lake glistened to my right. As I edged closer to the city, the streets narrowed and grew cleaner. Lincoln Park unfolded before me. Rows of immaculate brownstones, sleek cars lined in perfect symmetry, joggers with earbuds running past without a glance. Their world seemed sealed off, detached from the burden I carried. Finally, Elena's home appeared, a stately 3-story brick house with black shutters and a carefully tended garden bursting with blooms I didn't recognize. A warm golden glow spilled from the front window. My chest tightened. Everything about it radiated the life she had built without me. Success, independence, distance, and now, perhaps, danger. I stood at the base of the steps, my hand unconsciously smoothing the front of my coat. The deep crimson door loomed before me, polished brass catching the waning light and reflecting back a face I barely recognized, lined, weary, taut with tension. I pressed the bell. A delicate chime echoed through the quiet house, each note reverberating in my chest like the tolling of a summons I could not escape. Footsteps approached light, quick, achingly familiar. The peephole darkened, then cleared. A pause. The lock clicked. The door opened, spilling warm light into the dusk. Elena stood there, older than the last time I had seen her, yet unmistakably my daughter. Her black hair was cropped shorter now, styled to give her a sharper, more sophisticated air. A simple dress draped her frame, simple but costly, no doubt pricier than my monthly grocery bill. "Dad?" Her voice carried no hostility, no warmth, only surprise. "Hello, Elena." We stared across the threshold, the weight of 3 silent years rising between us like a wall. Relief washed over me despite myself. She looked healthy, no trace of the emergency surgery that had been invoked in the letter. My hand slipped into my coat pocket. I drew out the letter, my fingers trembling. "Did you write this?" Her brows furrowed as she scanned the handwriting, lips pressed into a thin line. The careful strokes were familiar, but not hers. She looked up sharply. "Where did you get this?" "It came in the mail today, on your birthday." Her voice was firm, but I caught the flicker of pain in her eyes. "Dad, I haven't written to you in 3 years. I didn't write this." The words cut deeper than the denial itself. The fact that I had even asked seemed to wound her further, as if it proved how little I knew her now. "Then who?" My voice cracked. "Who would forge your handwriting to beg for $15,000? "You tell me," she countered. "You're the one holding it. You brought it here." "Elena, I'm not accusing you. I'm trying to protect you. Someone used your name, your handwriting, your identity to scam us." My tone came out harsher than intended, but the truth demanded force. Her expression shifted, hardening. "How convenient," she said coldly. "You invent a letter as an excuse to show up here uninvited." The accusation struck like a slap. Why would I do that? Because you've tried every other way to reach me for 3 years, and now this is all you have left. Footsteps behind her. The sharp click of polished shoes on hardwood. Victor emerged, crisp shirt pressed, wristwatch gleaming under the hall light. He stopped just behind her, a hand settling on her shoulder in a gesture that was less comfort than claim. "Elena, who is it?" His tone was calm, rehearsed. "My father," she answered. "Apparently someone sent him a letter pretending to be me." Victor's face registered alarm, but in his eyes just for an instant I saw something colder, sharper, a flicker gone almost before it appeared. "Sounds like a scam," he said smoothly. "You should report it to the police, Henry." "Maybe I will." I studied his face, searching for recognition, guilt, anything. Strange, though $15,000. That's about what a man could lose in one bad night at a casino. His jaw tightened. Just for a second. Enough. "Dad, that's enough." Elena shifted subtly, placing herself in front of him, her fingers clutching the fabric of her dress until it wrinkled. "You can't just barge in here and start throwing accusations." "I'm not accusing," I said, my voice breaking under the weight of my frustration. "I'm asking questions, because whoever did this knows too much your birthday, our estrangement, even your handwriting. No stranger could have guessed all of that." Victor's voice dripped with condescension. "In the digital age, anyone can find that information online." "Can they?" I shot back. "Can they find samples of Elena's handwriting? Can they know she hasn't spoken to us in exactly 3 years?" "Dad, stop." Elena's tone was clipped, decisive. "I didn't write the letter. I don't know who did. And I can't help you figure it out." "Can't or won't," I whispered. Her eyes narrowed. She pulled the door inward. "Don't come here without calling first." "I did, 3 times. You didn't answer." "Then maybe you should have taken the hint." The door closed with a firm click. I stood there on the steps, the chill from Lake Michigan threading through the trees and wrapping itself around me. The cold was nothing compared to the distance that now felt permanent. A daughter on the other side of the door, a son-in-law behind her, and me left outside, clutching only questions with no answers. I turned my back on the crimson door, the metallic click of the lock sliding into place reverberating behind me. It landed sharp and cold, as though it had carved a final mark across my spine. Each step down the stoop felt like dragging my feet through heavy mud, leaving behind the imprints of a defeated man. By the time I reached my car, dusk had settled over Lincoln Park. In the rearview mirror, Elena's red brick townhouse receded, its glowing windows shrinking to faint golden dots, swallowed by distance. To anyone else, it would look like a warm home. To me, it was a fortress I had been cast out of. I slid behind the wheel, started the engine, and pulled away from the curb. What had once been a hopeful drive was now reduced to a crawl of humiliation along Lakeshore Drive. But humiliation wasn't the only thing gnawing at me. My mind replayed every second of the confrontation like a reel I couldn't switch off. Something about Victor's behavior stuck like a splinter. The speed with which he appeared in the hallway after Elena opened the door. The way his hand had settled on her shoulder not simply to comfort, but to hold, to block, to claim. And that brief flicker in his eyes when I mentioned the casino. Most men would have brushed off the accusation. Victor flinched. To anyone else, it might have been imperceptible, but I had spent 40 years as an engineer, trained to notice misalignments and errors that others overlooked. That instinct told me what my heart already suspected. Something was deeply wrong. Instead of heading straight back to Evanston, I found myself veering off, steering toward Daw Park, the old stretch of green, where I used to bring Elena when she was small. Back then, we would sit by the pond and toss breadcrumbs to the ducks, her laughter carrying in the breeze like a bell. Now, the pond was empty, a still sheet of water reflecting the dim orange of the setting Sunday. The wooden bench I chose was the same one we had shared decades ago, though the paint was more worn and the iron legs more rusted. I drew the forged letter from my coat pocket once more, this time not with trembling hands, but with the cool scrutiny of habit. I studied the loops and lines, the pressure of the strokes, the inconsistencies Clara had first pointed out. Yes, the mistakes were glaring now, but there was also an undeniable accuracy. Details about Elena, about our family, about the 3 years of silence. Whoever wrote this letter had intimate knowledge not just of her handwriting, but of her life. $15,000. Not 20, not 10, but 15. That wasn't a random sum. It was the exact kind of figure a desperate gambler would need to buy a few more weeks of breathing room. And Victor, who had already been caught with casino receipts in his glove compartment, fit that picture all too perfectly. The park around me hummed with a life that felt foreign. Children shrieked with laughter at the playground. Parents called their names. Families packed up picnic baskets to head home for dinner. Their voices were bright, unbroken, uncomplicated. In contrast, mine was a family scarred and fractured, with laughter replaced by suspicion, dinners replaced by silence, and a manipulator feeding off the rift. I folded the letter and slid it back into my pocket, the weight of it heavier now with clarity. It wasn't Elena who had betrayed me. It was the man standing in her hallway, the one who had worked so hard to isolate her, who was now desperate enough to counterfeit her very identity to exploit us. Victor had overplayed his hand today, exposing just enough to someone who knew how to read the signs. I rose from the bench, my knees stiff but my spirit steadier than it had been in years. It wasn't hope that carried me back to the car, but something sharper, resolve. Victor had made a mistake, and desperate men always make more. All Clara and I had to do was wait, watch, and be ready when the next crack appeared. The drive back home had taken only 5 minutes, yet it felt as though I had crawled through a tunnel of shadow and emerged into daylight. For the first time since the divorce, my anger had a clear target, and it was not my daughter. The next 3 days dragged like a slow torture, each hour weighted with unanswered questions. Clara and I spoke in circles, dissecting every detail of my confrontation with Elena, each strange flicker in Victor's expression. In the end, we agreed. Wait. Forcing things now might push Elena further away. Tuesday evening arrived, the sky heavy with rain, the air damp and cold. The weather mirrored my own unsettled heart. Clara was in the kitchen preparing dinner when the doorbell rang precisely at 7. "I'll get it," I called, half expecting a delivery or a neighbor. The last person I expected was my daughter, standing drenched on the porch, clutching a manila folder to her chest as though it were armor. Her hair clung to her cheeks, mascara streaked down her face, and her expensive coat had darkened with rain. "Elena," my voice faltered. "Dad, I need to talk to you." Her words cracked, betraying tears she had tried to hold back. I stepped aside quickly. "Come inside, sweetheart. You're soaked." She brushed past, shaking rain from her coat. Clara appeared in the hallway, dish towel still slung over her shoulder. At the sight of Elena, her expression collapsed, from surprise to pain in an instant. "Oh, honey," Clara's voice broke. She spun on her heel, nearly slipping on the wet floor as she dashed to fetch a towel. Elena didn't wait. Her hands trembled as she pulled out the contents of the folder, spreading damp pages across the coffee table. The ink bled in places, but the words were clear, rows upon rows of handwriting exercises, each one a distorted echo of her identity. Elena Carter, Lincoln Park Avenue, even rough drafts of the very letter I had received. My knees buckled. I lowered myself into a chair opposite her, my chest tightening. Every fleeting suspicion, every flash of guilt in Victor's eyes now crystallized into certainty. Looking at those shaky imitations of my daughter's hand was like staring into a nightmare that confirmed itself line by line. "I found them yesterday," Elena whispered, voice hoarse. "I was searching for our insurance paperwork. They were hidden inside a file labeled business expenses." She jabbed a finger at the papers. "He's been practicing my name, my address, even the letter." Her breath shuddered as she continued. "When I confronted him, he laughed at first, said someone must be trying to frame him. But then I told him I would call you, that I would ask if you'd really received a letter." Her eyes darkened. His face collapsed, like sandcastles in the tide. And then he admitted everything. The rain hammered harder against the windows, filling the silence with its relentless rhythm. Clara stood frozen at the edge of the room, clutching the towel to her chest, her knuckles white. "He owes $37,000, Elena finally confessed, her voice breaking. "Not just to the Hammond Casino he's been borrowing from loan sharks. I listened to him talk, and it was like I was living with a stranger, someone I never really knew. The number sat between us like a stone slab, crushing the air from the room. 37,000. The forged letter asking for 15 had only been the opening act, a down payment in a play of desperation." Elena wiped her face with the back of her hand. Her eyes, though wet and swollen, glimmered with resolve. "He thought you'd be soft, Dad, that you'd be so desperate to hear from me, you'd send money without asking questions. He underestimated you, and he underestimated me." Clara finally moved, kneeling beside Elena, draping the towel over her shoulders. The three of us sat together, the lamplight casting tired shadows across our faces, while the storm outside pressed harder against the windows. Elena's voice was quiet, but unyielding. "I can't let him keep doing this. Not to you, not to me." I sank heavily into the armchair, my whole body dragged down by the crushing gravity of truth finally revealed. Victor was not merely a selfish husband, he had driven his fangs into the very wounds of our family, feeding his debts with our pain. Across from me, Elena's voice trembled, but her eyes shone with courage. "Dad, I'm so sorry." The tears came again, rolling down her cheeks and spilling onto the damp papers still spread across the coffee table, staining them with blurred smudges. "You were right. 3 years ago, you tried to warn me, and I turned away. I chose to believe a manipulator over my own father." Her words cut into the silence like glass breaking. "I let him whisper poison into my ear," she went on, her shoulders shaking. "He told me your love was nothing more than chains, that you only wanted to control me, and I believed him. I threw away the most precious thing in my life, the trust of my parents." Clara moved quietly from the doorway and sat down beside her daughter. She wrapped both arms around Elena's shoulders, pulling her close, her hand smoothing down the wet strands of hair as she had so many times when Elena was a frightened child waking from nightmares. "The important thing," Clara murmured, her own voice shaking, "is that you are here now. You don't have to carry this alone anymore." Elena drew in a deep breath, and when she spoke again, her tone carried a steadiness that startled me. "Tomorrow, I'm filing for divorce. There's nothing left to salvage in a marriage built on lies and greed." I stared at her, and for the first time in 3 years I truly saw my daughter, not the defensive woman who had once turned her back, but the child we had raised into a strong, intelligent woman who could rise even from betrayal's ashes. Her lips trembled as she whispered, "Can you ever forgive me?" In that moment, I caught the flicker of her 12-year-old self, the way she used to glance at me when she scraped her knees falling off her bike, desperate for reassurance. My throat closed, no words would come. Instead, I opened my arms. She collapsed against me, her frame shaking, smaller than I remembered. The scent of rain, salt tears, and the familiar fragrance of her hair surrounded me. Clara's arms circled us both, binding the three of us together. For the first time in 3 long years, I felt the fracture in our family begin to heal. The scent of beef stew drifted warmly through the kitchen, mingling with the faint metallic clink of forks and knives and the steady patter of rain against the window. Elena lowered herself into her old chair, her fingers absently tracing the shallow scratch etched into the tabletop years ago, a scar from her childhood, still there like a quiet witness to time. Her voice cracked the stillness. "He was so skillful he turned everything ordinary into a weapon for control," she murmured, eyes fixed on the untouched food before her. "A phone call from you became a burden. A visit from Mom was an intrusion. And I believed it." I reached across the table, my hand finding hers, trembling against the cool porcelain plate. "You weren't blind," I said softly. "You were attacked with precision and subtlety. What matters now is that you see clearly." Clara set her spoon down, the sound delicate but firm. 3 years are gone, yes, but tomorrow is not lost. Don't let the past chain you to its ruins. Her tone carried the weight of decades, a steadying presence neither Elena nor I could ignore. I rose slowly, pulling open the kitchen drawer. The quiet click of the wood sliding out felt ceremonial, the strike of the match inside even more so. "Speaking of tomorrow," I said, lifting the crumpled letter, "there's something we need to do together." Elena pushed her chair back almost instinctively, following my lead. Clara joined us, and soon the three of us stood shoulder to shoulder around the sink, not as broken fragments of a family, but as one, performing a ritual of release. The match flared to life, a sulfur bite in the air before the flame caught the corner of the forged letter. Paper curled inward, blackening, then surrendered itself into ash. Elena clutched Clara's sleeve, whispering, "Let it disappear." The counterfeit words shriveled, collapsing under the heat until the last fragile scraps slid into the drain, carried away with a hiss. And in that moment, watching the final ember fade, I saw it reflected in Elena's eyes' relief. The little fire had consumed more than paper. It had burned through 3 years of lies, deceit, and manipulation, clearing space for something truer to rise. A new beginning flickered quietly in the glow left behind. Clara slipped quietly into the living room and returned carrying the family photo album, its leather cover worn soft with age, the corners frayed, the faint smell of yellowed paper drifting into the kitchen. She set it gently on the table as though she were placing the very weight of our family's memory between us. She opened to a page where Elena, just 8 years old, beamed between us at a Cubs game. Her white t-shirt bore streaks of ketchup, her cheeks smeared with traces of hot dog, and her smile stretched wide with unfiltered joy. "Remember this day?" Clara asked, her eyes glowing with tender amusement. "Henry wouldn't stop buying hot dogs every inning. And you kept handing them to me," Elena said, laughter bursting from her chest. "Even though I only ever ate half." The sound filled the small kitchen, bright and unguarded, the first real laugh I had heard from her in 3 years. It was so pure it made my eyes sting. We lingered over each photograph, turning the pages slowly, letting the years unfold. Elena in a pink dress at her 10th birthday party, leaning over the cake to blow out candles. Torn wrapping paper piled beneath the Christmas tree one snowy morning. A summer trip to Wisconsin, her hair damp and wild after swimming, her grin crooked but full of life. Each page carried us back, stitching a trail of warmth through the silence that had once consumed us. The soft glow of the kitchen lamp reflected across our bent heads, painting our faces in gentle gold. Outside, the rain tapped steadily against the windows, a muted percussion, but inside, laughter and memory drove the shadows away. For an hour, the storm of betrayal and loss felt distant, replaced by the quiet rhythm of shared remembrance. Each photograph was more than paper and ink. They were mirrors, reflecting a truth no manipulator could erase. We had been a family bound by love, and that bond, though bruised and battered, had never died. The images reminded us that our history wasn't just behind us. It flowed in our blood, in the small gestures, in the way we leaned toward one another now. These memories were not relics. They were living veins beneath the scars, waiting patiently for the day they could pulse again. That night, as we closed the old album, I realized healing had already begun. "Elena," I whispered, watching her fingertip trace the cloudy plastic that covered a photo from when she was 16. In it, she was mid-laugh, rolling her eyes at one of my clumsy jokes. Now, standing beside me, she repeated that same gesture, the roll of her eyes, but this time it carried a bittersweet weight, a blend of nostalgia and regret. "I remember this so clearly," she said softly, her voice breaking into the quiet hum of the house. "I remember when all that mattered to you and Mom was whether I was happy, whether I was healthy, not what anyone could get from me." I reached for her hand, my calloused fingers trembling with emotion as they closed over hers. "You'll always have that, Elena. Always. From this moment on, no more years of silence. Whatever comes, whatever storm tries to divide us, we hold on. We never let go again." Her lips pressed together, trembling before she spoke, and then she gave the smallest, most resolute nod. "Never again," she said, her voice hushed but firm, her reddened eyes burning with a determination I had never seen in her before. "And Dad, I want to write you a letter, a real letter, in my own handwriting. I want to tell you everything I've carried inside for the last 3 years." The words cut through me, sharp and healing all at once. The contrast was staggering. From a forged letter, created to steal, to a genuine one, born of reconciliation and love. It felt like the universe itself had reached down to correct the balance, to trade counterfeit cruelty for authentic truth. Outside, the rain had eased, leaving streaks of pale light breaking through the window pane, catching the side of Elena's face in a soft glow. Inside, the kitchen smelled faintly of beef stew, and the three of us sat close enough to feel the warmth of one another's presence. For the first time in years, I felt the thread of our family tie tighten, woven back together by honesty, by promises spoken aloud, and by the hope of a letter still to come. "What about Victor?" Clara asked, her voice steady but edged with the practical sharpness that had carried us through so many storms. "Where will you stay while the divorce is being processed?" "I've already moved out," Elena said quietly. "I'm at a hotel for now, but—" She hesitated, her eyes darting between us, full of both fear and longing. "I was hoping, could I stay here, just for a few weeks, until I find a place of my own?" I didn't even let her finish before answering. "Elena, this is your home," I said firmly. "It has always been your home. We only lost you for a while." Later that evening, after dinner, the three of us gathered in the kitchen, the sink filled with warm, soapy water, and without needing to assign tasks, we fell into old rhythms. Clara washed, I rinsed, and Elena dried. At one point, Clara began to hum an old tune she used to sing on Sunday nights while doing dishes. Elena let out a sudden laugh when a splash of water hit my shirt, and I couldn't help laughing with her. After 3 years of silence, the sound of her laughter ringing in the kitchen was nothing short of a small miracle. Without words, we moved as if the years apart had never happened. The clink of dishes, the faint citrus smell of dish soap, and the warm glow of the kitchen lamp glinting on Clara's silvering hair filled the air. I stood there, surprised at how naturally family life had slipped back into place, as if it had been waiting patiently for us all along. Later, Elena carried her suitcase down the hall and paused at the doorway of her old room. She stepped inside slowly, fingertips brushing across the bookshelf where her childhood novels still stood in a neat row. On the desk, a dust-flecked picture frame held a photo of the three of us at the beach, the corners curling with time. She placed her clothes carefully onto the same bed where she had once sprawled out to study, then sat down, smiling faintly as though she was face to face with the girl she used to be at 18. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad," she said, her voice low and trembling, her eyes shimmering with tears. I walked to her side and rested a hand gently on her shoulder. My throat tightened, but my words came out clear. "I never intended to give up, Elena. Family doesn't give up. Family waits." I stepped back and looked at her, my daughter, sitting once again on the bed in a room saturated with memory. At that moment, I understood a truth so simple it pierced me. Families can be fractured by anger, buried under years of silence, but they are never truly gone. What defines a family is not the absence of mistakes or the guarantee of closeness, but the capacity to wait, to forgive, and to welcome back. That is what makes a family endure. "Sweetheart, this is your home," I said. "It always has been. We only lost you for a while." We drifted into the kitchen as if guided by an old, familiar current. With the three of us shoulder to shoulder at the sink, one passing plates, one rinsing, one toweling, Clara began to whistle that old Sunday night tune she used to hum without thinking. Elena burst into laughter when a spray of water freckled my shirt, and I couldn't help laughing with her. After 3 silent years, that sound rang through the kitchen like a small, ordinary miracle. Without a word, our bodies remembered where to stand and how to move. We moved in step as though the habits had never left. The clink and chime of dishes, the clean citrus of soap, the golden cone of the overhead lamp settling softly across Clara's silvering hair, and I found myself astonished that the true rhythm of family life had slipped back into place. When the last glass was set to dry and the counters wiped down, Elena carried her suitcase down the hall and paused at the threshold of her old room. She stepped in and stilled, fingertips brushing the shelf where the paperbacks she once devoured still stood in neat ranks. On the desk, a dust-misted frame held a photo of the three of us at the beach, right where it had always been. She unlatched the suitcase and laid each piece of clothing on the old bed, then smiled small and sudden, as if catching sight of her 18-year-old self in the mirror of memory. "Thank you for not giving up on me, Dad," Elena said, voice low, eyes shining. I crossed the room and set my hand on her shoulder, my own chest tightening. "I never meant to give up at all. Family is the place that waits for you to come home." I stepped back and took her and my daughter on the old quilt in a room stitched with our history, and the truth settled clear and simple. Families can be split by anger and buried beneath distance, but they do not vanish. What makes a family real is not perfection or constant closeness, it's the stubborn capacity to wait, to forgive, and to open the door again. Outside, the rain fell in a steady rhythm, each drop tapping against the eaves as though washing away not only the dust of the city, but also the resentment and misunderstandings that had weighed on my family for 3 long years. Every bead of water striking the earth seemed to whisper the same promise, the chance for a new beginning. Inside, the golden light from our living room spilled against the window, glowing in sharp contrast to the gray dampness beyond. Elena sat quietly on the sofa, her hair still damp, her face softer now, as if a heavy burden had finally lifted from her shoulders. Clara closed the curtains gently, then turned to smile, a small, unspoken gesture that told me what I already felt in my chest. Our family had truly come home again. And yet, as I listened to the rain's steady chorus, I realized this downpour was not just ours. It could be yours too, a reminder that no matter how heavy the pain, time and truth will eventually wash it clean. If this story has touched you, I invite you to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your thoughts in the comments below. Tell me, what does family mean to you? And if you'd like to continue walking with us through the next chapters, click the box on the left of your screen, because sometimes the stories that feel most distant hold the light we need to find our way back home. Thank you for staying with me through this story. If it has touched your heart even a little, please take a moment to like this video. It helps more people find it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter, and I would truly love to hear from you. Leave a comment below and share your thoughts, maybe a memory of your own family, or simply what part of this story resonated with you most. Your voice matters here, and together we can keep these stories alive.